In the middle
I'm
of a
getting you
deadly
out of here.
snowstorm, a Navy
Stay with
SEAL and
me.
his loyal
Don't you
K-9
give up
stumbled
on me
upon a
now.
dying officer buried beneath the ice and uncovered a secret that a corrupt police network was willing to kill for. With every step through the storm, enemies closed in. With every breath, hope slipped further away. But when betrayal rose like a blade in the dark, courage answered. In the fury of a wounded dog, in the resolve of a soldier who refused to back down, and in a dawn that returned the truth the world tried to bury. If you believe justice still shines in the darkest places, hit subscribe, like, and comment to support more stories of courage, redemption, and unbreakable loyalty. The mountains slept under a blizzard that clawed at the world with white, unbroken fury. The storm smothered the valley roads, swallowed sound, and turned the night into a swirling wall of snow and jagged wind. Even a seasoned mountaineer would have hesitated to travel under such conditions, but Evan Hale moved through it with the steady, controlled stride of a man who had survived far worse storms. Storms born of war, fire, and the cold silence of loss. Evan was 34, tall and powerfully built, with the unmistakable posture of a Navy SEAL. Shoulders squared, core tight, every step balanced even on treacherous ice. His dark brown hair was trimmed close to his scalp, clean and exact like military regulation insisted, and the sharp planes of his face looked carved from stone. The scars along his jaw and temple weren't the dramatic kind, barely visible unless the light hit them just right, but they told the story of a man who had been forged in violent crucibles. His skin bore the weathering of countless deployments, sun, sand, cold, and fear, and yet his eyes held something contradictory. Gentleness buried under vigilance, a restraint honed by a soldier who knew exactly how easily life could slip away if one blinked at the wrong moment. Beside him ran Shadow, a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois bred for war and brilliance. The dog's coat, dark mahogany at the back, fading to sandy tan at the legs, shifted like a living shadow under the storm. Shadow's ears flicked constantly, radar-like, scanning for sounds that even the wind could not hide. His breath puffed into the frigid air, in rhythmic bursts, staying tight at Evan's right knee as if tethered by an invisible line. Shadow was not just trained, he was elite, a Tier 1 K-9 asset who had fast-roped from helicopters, tracked insurgents through heat-mirage deserts, and once dragged Evan out of a collapsed building in Syria with nothing but teeth and determination. They were bonded by battle, by survival, by the unspoken language of men and animals who had seen death and refused to succumb to it. Tonight, Evan wasn't running drills or seeking adventure. He was simply clearing his mind the only way that ever worked anymore: motion, steady, punishing, relentless. The cold gave him something to fight besides the memories that lurked whenever life grew too still. The blizzard held no fear to a man who had sprinted across minefields, who had listened to the ticking silence after an IED misfire, who had cleaned blood, sometimes his own, often not, from his hands before regrouping for the next breach. But even in his controlled, almost meditative focus, something pierced the howl of the storm, a faint metallic shriek, followed by the unmistakable crunch of twisting metal sliding over ice. Shadow stopped instantly, his muscles locked like coiled springs, ears forward, eyes bright. "Shadow?" Evan whispered, but it wasn't really a question. Shadow didn't freeze without reason. The Malinois lowered his head and took off, weaving through the snow in sharp, confident arcs. Evan followed, pushing harder through the whiteout until the shape came into view. A police cruiser tilted at a violent angle, nose buried deep in a roadside embankment. The windshield was a mosaic of shattered glass, and the passenger door hung open as if torn by an invisible hand. Snow already filled the interior, like nature was trying to bury all evidence of what had happened. Evan slowed only a second, his instincts sliding into gear. Approach angle, sight lines, threat radius. No tracks except the car's skid marks. No other vehicles, no footprints near the ditch. That wasn't right. An accident in a storm would leave marks, someone stumbling away trying to call for help, trying to survive. Here, there was only silence. Shadow reached the driver's side first and emitted a low growl, one that resonated from deep within his chest. Evan's pulse quickened. He circled around and saw her, a young woman slumped across the driver's seat, her long blonde hair matted with blood. Her police uniform had been shredded in places, revealing bruises swelling dark beneath her pale skin. She looked barely 30, small-framed but strong in the forearms and shoulders, someone accustomed to physical work and confrontations. Evan reached for her wrist, cold, weak, fluttering, alive but slipping. "Hey," he murmured, voice low, calm, steady, the voice of a man who had steadied dying soldiers in dust-choked ruins. "Officer, stay with me." The woman's lips parted, but only a thin exhale escaped, fogging the cold air. Evan scanned quickly. Bullet graze along the ribcage, deep laceration on the shoulder, bruising along the jawline, shaped like boot impact. 2 gunshot wounds? No. 1. The second pattern wasn't a bullet. It was blunt force trauma. Someone had hit her, hard, and intentionally. This wasn't a car crash. This was a dump site, a staging, a cover-up. Evan's jaw clenched, and the cold inside him deepened into something sharper. He slipped one arm under her knees, the other behind her back. She was feather light, far too light for a cop trained to handle mountain towns. Shadow circled them protectively, scanning the white veil around them. "Let's move," Evan muttered. He didn't know who had tried to kill her, or whether they were coming back, but he knew the storm was covering their tracks fast. A piece of crumpled paper fluttered across the snow, torn from the cruiser's dashboard. Evan caught it with his boot. It wasn't paper. It was a torn patch from her uniform. Amar, he didn't need the rest. Evan trudged through the whiteout toward a shape he recognized, a small abandoned mountain cabin once used by loggers decades ago. The roof sagged, the porch was half collapsed, but it would shield them from the storm. Inside, the air smelled of rot and old smoke. Evan set her gently on a wooden table, cleared of debris with one sweep of his arm. Shadow stationed himself at the doorway, hyper-alert. Evan examined her again. Her breathing faltered, like each inhale was a battle she wasn't sure she wanted to keep fighting. "Officer," he said firmly, "I need your name." Her eyelids fluttered, a whisper, delicate as frost. Marin." Evan nodded once. "Marin, I'm Evan. This is Shadow. You're safe for now. Stay with me." Marin's eyes opened a fraction, revealing irises the color of winter steel. Strong, stubborn, fighting even while her body failed her. Evan pressed sterile gauze, one of the few medical supplies he always carried, against her side. Blood seeped fast, too fast. He needed to close the wound, slow the bleeding, get heat in her body before hypothermia worsened the shock. As he worked, Marin's fingers twitched and brushed his arm. Her nails were broken, dirt under them. She had fought someone, fought hard. They chased me," she rasped. "Not accident." Evan's voice stayed low. "Who?" Her eyes clouded, unfocused. "Not cops, not anymore." The words chilled him more than the storm. Evan was used to corruption overseas, but here, in a small mountain town, something bigger was happening, something hidden under the storm. Shadow growled again. Evan froze. The Malinois stood rigid, hackles high, body angled toward the window, where the swirling snow suddenly felt too quiet. Danger. Evan killed the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed them. He moved to the window, eyes narrowing. Through the storm's shifting veil, faint but unmistakable. Headlights, far down the road, crawling slowly, deliberate, hunting. Evan's mind moved with precision, seal precision. They weren't here to rescue Marin. They were here to confirm the kill. "Shadow," he whispered. The dog dropped into silence, ready to strike if needed. Evan lifted Marin again. She whimpered, but he steadied her. "We can't stay," he murmured. "They're coming." He stepped out the back of the cabin, into the teeth of the blizzard, letting the wind erase their tracks instantly. Shadow led, weaving them into the tree line. Evan felt Marin's heartbeat falter against his chest, and something inside him tightened. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know her story. But a soldier knows when an innocent is being hunted. A soldier knows when fate hands him a mission. And he didn't leave missions unfinished, not anymore. Not after the past that still clung to him like smoke. Behind them, the cabin door slammed open under the force of pursuing men. Flashlights cut through the darkness, voices barked orders, snow-muffled gunmetal clicks. Evan slipped deeper into the forest, breath controlled, muscles coiled, heart steady. Shadow glanced back only once, eyes burning with fierce loyalty. The storm raged on, but the real danger had just begun. Snow howled through the pines like a chorus of ghosts as night descended upon the mountains, and the freezing wind clawed at every inch of exposed skin as if trying to strip the world down to its bones. Deep in the forest, half concealed beneath a blanket of thick white drifts, Evan Hale moved with disciplined precision, his breath steady despite the weight of the injured woman he carried in his arms. Marin's head rested against his chest, her hair, pale gold streaked with dried blood, fluttering slightly in the frigid air. At 34, Evan had marched across deserts, swamps, and tundra, but few environments tested a man like a mountain storm at night. His muscles burned under the strain, but he embraced the ache. Pain was familiar. Pain meant he was alive. Behind him, Shadow trotted silently, his paws barely making a sound on the powdery ground. The 5-year-old Malinois scanned the trees with unwavering intensity, amber eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Every snap of a twig, every shift in the wind made the dog's ears flick, processing threats with instinct sharpened by combat. Shadow wasn't merely alert. He was hunting something Evan couldn't yet see. Evan felt the shift in atmosphere the same way soldiers sense an ambush. Subtle, wrong, heavy. He stopped beneath a fallen pine trunk and crouched, adjusting Marin's weight while listening to the storm's rhythm. "Shadow," he whispered. The dog froze, head tilting toward the left side of the forest. Evan couldn't hear footsteps, not yet, but he trusted Shadow more than he trusted his own senses. "Someone's trailing us," Evan murmured to himself. "Fast!" Marin stirred at the sound of his voice. Her lashes fluttered, revealing storm-gray eyes clouded with pain. Her lips were cracked, pale. "Where am I?" she rasped. Evan looked down at her, his expression steady, but his internal calculus shifting rapidly. Her consciousness meant clarity, but also fear. "Out of danger for the moment," he answered, "but not far enough." Marin winced. "The men, the ones chasing me?" She swallowed, throat tight, as if the memory itself bruised her. "They're police officers, or used to be. They're part of a unit that's been stealing military hardware, guidance chips, encrypted comms, armor plates. I found their stash." Evan's jaw tightened. "And they tried to kill you to cover it up." Marin nodded weakly. "They ambushed me near the ridge, shot the car, tried to drag me out before the storm hit us. I fought, but there were too many. I ran. They followed." She trembled violently. Evan shifted her so his jacket wrapped around her shoulders. "You did good staying alive," he said quietly. "You did better than most." She blinked at him, studying the harsh cut of his jaw, the determination set deep in every line of his face. He looked like a man built from iron and shadow, unyielding, controlled, the kind of man who didn't fear, dying because he'd already faced death often enough. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who won't let them finish the job," Evan replied simply. He eased her down behind the fallen tree, shielding her from the wind while he scanned the slopes. "Shadow, perimeter." The Malinois sprinted forward, weaving between the trees. Marin watched him disappear into the darkness. "Your dog?" she murmured. "He moves like he's trained." "He is," Evan said. "Shadow's a SEAL K9, and the best partner I've ever had." Marin's eyes softened, even through the pain. "You're military." "Was," Evan corrected. "Retired, mostly." He didn't elaborate. The last mission he'd served still haunted the edges of his mind. An operation in Syria that had ended in fire, screams, and rubble. Shadow had dragged Evan's unconscious body out of the ruins after an airstrike collapsed their building. Evan had survived, but the nightmares never left. He pushed that memory aside. He had no room for ghosts when real threats were closing in. A sharp bark broke through the noise of the storm. Shadow returned at a sprint, his body tense. Evan rose instantly. "They're close," he muttered. "2, maybe 3. Shadow wouldn't bark unless he saw shapes." Marin's breathing quickened. "Evan, if they catch us, they won't." He scooped her up again, ignoring the sting in his muscles. A flicker of guilt crossed his features. Guilt because part of him felt alive for the first time in months. He had someone to protect. A mission again. "Hold on," he said. The forest thickened ahead, branches heavy with snow forming natural barriers. Evan pushed through them, navigating terrain like someone who had lived his entire life under pressure. He spotted the faint outline of an old ranger cabin, a different one from before, half buried by time and decay, perfect for a temporary shelter. He nudged the door open with his shoulder. The hinges groaned but held. Inside smelled of damp wood and dead leaves. Evan set Marin down near the remains of a stone fireplace. Shadow circled once, then sat facing the door, rigid as steel. Evan broke apart a wooden crate and arranged the pieces inside the fireplace. A spark from his flint ignited the driest shavings. Soon a small flame licked upward, casting warm light across Marin's bruised face. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. Evan tore a strip from his undershirt and pressed it against her wound. "Tell me what else you know," he said. "It might keep you awake." Marin nodded slowly. The unit started small, contraband, stolen confiscations, but then Sergeant Hoxley took over. Evan paused. "Hoxley?" Marin swallowed. Tall man, mid-40s, shaved head, thick beard, built like a linebacker. He used to be decent, a veteran, but something changed after his last deployment. He became cold, violent, and he started taking bribes from arms dealers. Evan pictured the type immediately, a soldier broken by war, filling the fracture with greed and rage. "Who else is after you?" Marin's gaze dropped. "Officer Quinn, late 30s, thin, wiry, brown hair, pockmarked skin, smokes constantly. He's the one who shot at me, likes hurting people. They follow Hoxley without question." Evan grunted. "Corruption's always worst when the weak follow the broken." Marin looked at him strangely, sensing he wasn't just speaking about her pursuers. The fire crackled softly. Outside, wind screamed past the stones like a warning. "Evan," she whispered, "why did you help me?" He didn't answer at first. How could he explain that he had been drifting since leaving the SEALs, carrying wounds invisible under muscle and discipline? How could he explain that saving someone else gave him a chance to silence his own ghosts? "Because someone has to," he finally said. "And Shadow picked up your scent. That makes it my problem." Before she could respond, Shadow stiffened. A low growl vibrated through his chest. Evan's hand went to his knife. "Get down," he hissed. A crunch of snow sounded outside, then another. Voices, muffled by the storm but unmistakably human, drifted toward them. "She couldn't have gone far," a deep voice growled. Hoxley had to be. Evan's muscles coiled like steel cables. Another voice followed, thin, nasally, irritated. "Tracks ended back there, storms covering everything too fast." "Quinn?" Evan lowered his body, positioning himself between Marin and the door. His heartbeat slowed. The controlled descent into combat readiness that SEALs learn to master. Calm mind, fast hands, purpose over fear. A silhouette passed the window. Shadows shifted, snow crunched again. Evan silently drew his sidearm. Shadow rose in sync with him, eyes locked on the entrance, tail rigid. Hoxley's voice rumbled. "Spread out. Cabins around here. She could be hiding." Quinn scoffed. "If she is, we kill whoever's with her too." Evan met Shadow's eyes, a silent command. The Malinois moved to the corner, poised to strike, breath steady. Evan watched the doorknob dip slightly under pressure, someone testing it. Then, a gunshot cracked outside, aimed at the hinges. Wood splintered. Evan acted first. He kicked the door hard, slamming it into the man standing outside. The snow muffled the impact, but Quinn's scream cut through the wind. Evan lunged out, punching Quinn across the jaw. Quinn stumbled but didn't fall. He was wiry, snake-fast, eyes wide with malice. "You!" Quinn spat. "You're dead." Evan blocked a wild swing, twisted Quinn's arm, and slammed him into the cabin wall. Quinn gasped for air. Hoxley shouted from somewhere deeper in the storm. "Quinn, report!" Evan hit him again. Quinn dropped into the snow, unconscious. Shadow leapt past Evan and sprinted into the darkness, intercepting a second hostile moving toward them. Evan heard a brief scuffle, a grunt, a yelp, and then silence. Shadow returned a moment later, panting but unharmed, but Hoxley was still out there, and he wasn't someone who fell easily. Evan grabbed Marin and lifted her again. "We move now," he said. "Where?" she breathed. "Away from here. They're marking every cabin." Shadow barked once, a sharp, urgent signal. Evan turned. In the snow behind them were fresh footprints, large, deep, moving fast. Hoxley's footsteps, closing in. "He's tracking us," Marin whispered. Evan met her gaze, voice steady. "Then we stay ahead of him." He stepped into the storm again, Shadow leading the way, the night pressing in around them like a living threat. Behind them, Hoxley's voice echoed through the trees, a promise, a warning, a hunter's growl. "You can run," he shouted, "but you won't get far." Evan tightened his grip on Marin and pushed forward, eyes narrowed, muscles primed. "Watch me," he muttered. Then he and Shadow disappeared into the blizzard's dark heart. The storm thickened into a whirl of white needles as night swallowed the mountains completely, and the wind grew so violent it seemed capable of tearing bark off trees. Evan Hale felt the temperature drop with a sudden, punishing bite as he pushed forward through snowdrifts that rose nearly to his knees. His breaths came out in controlled bursts, steady and silent despite the weight of Marin slumped against his chest. Her head rested in the crook of his shoulder, her breath shallow and uneven, her blonde hair stiff with frost. Shadow padded ahead, his silhouette barely visible in the storm's chaos, but his movements sure and driven by purpose. Evan relied on the dog's instincts as much as his own. Shadow had a way of finding the safest route, the cover no human eye could identify through this blizzard. "Almost there," Evan muttered under his breath, unsure if he was reassuring Marin or himself. The storm made distance impossible to gauge, but he knew what he was looking for. A Cold War listening bunker he remembered stumbling across during a mountain survival exercise years ago. Built of reinforced concrete and buried beneath layers of earth, the bunker had been decommissioned decades earlier. Most locals didn't know it existed. It was exactly the kind of place to hide from armed men hunting through a blizzard. Shadow suddenly barked once, a sharp signal, and veered to the right. Evan followed the dog into a small depression in the ground, where the snow thinned slightly, revealing the faint outline of a metal door camouflaged by pine branches and drifts. "Good boy," Evan whispered. With careful movements, he lowered Marin to a sitting position against a rock outcrop. She groaned softly but didn't wake fully. Evan brushed snow from the bunker door's latch. The metal was ice-cold and stiff, but after a hard pull, the hinges gave way with a screech of rust. A wave of stale air, smelling of wet concrete and forgotten years, drifted upward. Evan lifted Marin into his arms again and descended the narrow staircase, Shadow following close behind. The bunker interior was a single long corridor leading to a reinforced chamber. His flashlight beam illuminated dusty consoles, cracked monitors, and a thick layer of grime covering everything. Most equipment was dead, but the structure itself was solid, and that was what mattered. He kicked debris away from the corner of the room and laid Marin gently onto an old cot frame. Her skin had taken a worrying pallor, too pale even in the dim light. "Stay with me?" Evan said quietly. Marin's eyes opened enough to catch his face. Her voice was hoarse. Did we lose them?" For the moment. Evan examined her wounds again. Bleeding had slowed, but not enough. He needed better light, heat, and supplies. His flashlight caught something metallic under a fallen desk, a battered emergency kit. He tore it open. Most supplies had expired 20 years ago, but dressings and antiseptic, wipes were still usable. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "Do it," she whispered. Evan cleaned the wound with practiced hands. Marin jerked in pain, but didn't cry out. She had a quiet resilience, the kind born from years on patrol dealing with humanity's darker corners. Up close, she looked younger when her face wasn't twisted in agony. Late 20s, high cheekbones, fair skin dusted with freckles across her nose, hair long but knotted from snow and blood. The injury had drained some of the strength from her features, but her eyes still held that same glint of determination, a survivor's fire. "Tell me what they're after," Evan said as he worked. Marin winced. "Evidence, something I took from them. It's in my jacket, inside pocket." Evan reached into the torn uniform and pulled out a small recording device, black, rectangular, military grade. His brows furrowed. "Where did you get this?" From their safe house, Marin breathed. It has everything: names, transfers, shipments, Hoxley, Quinn, and at least 6 others in the department. They're selling guidance chips to foreign buyers, mercenaries, groups the U.S. considers hostile. Evan turned the device over, noting its weight, the reinforced casing, the subtle scratch marks around the screws. Someone had tried to destroy it, but lacked time. "You risked your life for this," he said. Marin blinked slowly. Someone had to. If these chips get out of the country, dozens of systems could be compromised, maybe hundreds, airports, bases. We'd never see an attack coming. Evan nodded grimly. He'd deployed to regions where guidance chips had been tampered with. The aftermath wasn't something civilians should ever witness. He slipped the recorder into his own jacket. "Then we get this to someone who can stop them." Marin managed a faint smile. "I knew you weren't just a random hiker." "Never claimed to be," he replied as he finished bandaging her. "Rest now. We need you stable." She exhaled shakily and allowed her eyes to close. Shadow moved to lie beside her cot, positioning himself like a sentry. Evan took a calm breath and scanned the bunker again. Power systems were dead, but there was an old communications array mounted in the corner, a relic with a corroded antenna wire running upward into the earth. If he could feed power into it, even briefly, he might send a burst signal strong enough to reach a nearby ranger station or military frequency. He moved to the panel and opened it. The internal wiring was intact. A miracle. He found a small rechargeable battery pack among emergency supplies. Its power was faint, depleted, but with some rewiring he might juice the comms long enough. Evan's fingers moved with soldierly precision, twisting wires and reconnecting circuits. His breathing slowed, focus narrowing into the calm space he entered during missions. After several minutes, a faint hum pulsed through the console. A weak, flickering light popped on. "Come on," he murmured. He tuned through dead frequencies, static crackling like distant thunder underwater. Then, a faint signal, barely a whisper, but real. Evan leaned in, beginning to configure a burst transmission. If he could send the coordinates and an encrypted distress code, any military network scanning old Cold War channels might notice. But just as he prepared to transmit, Shadow suddenly leapt to his feet with a growl that vibrated the walls. Evan froze. A moment later, he heard it too. Faint footsteps crunching above the bunker roof. Not one man, several. "Damn it," Evan hissed. Hoxley had found them. Shadow moved to the bunker door, posture rigid, head low. Evan grabbed his weapon in Marin's jacket, slipping the recorder inside his own pack. The footsteps grew louder. Snow slid off the door as someone above brushed it clean. Evan moved quickly to Marin, lifting her enough so she leaned against the wall. Her eyelids fluttered open. "They're here?" she whispered, voice trembling. "Yeah," Evan said, "but we're going to hold them." She tried to push herself up, but winced. "I can fight. Not like this. Let me and Shadow work." Her eyes glistened, not with fear but frustration. She wasn't used to being the one protected. Evan brushed a hand across her shoulder. "You staying alive is the mission." Shadow barked sharply as the bunker door shuttered. A metal clang echoed down the stairwell. Evan aimed his pistol at the entrance and braced himself. The door slammed again. Then a voice, cold, deep, unmistakable, echoed down. "You think you can hide, Hale?" "Hoxley," Evan muttered. "He knows my name." "They checked your car registration," Marin whispered. "I told you. They have access to everything." Evan tightened his grip on the pistol. "Stay back." The door blew inward as a boot smashed through the locking bracket. 2 men stormed down the stairs, mercenaries, not cops. Hoxley had brought reinforcements. The first was tall, muscular, with a shaved head and scars down one cheek. The other was smaller but quick, long hair tied back in a ponytail, eyes sharp with cruelty. Evan fired twice. The larger man took a round in the shoulder and fell back. Shadow lunged at the smaller one, tackling him with explosive force. The confined bunker filled with chaos, the man shouting, the dog snarling, boots scraping concrete. Evan rushed the second attacker, slamming him against the wall. They grappled hand to hand, the mercenary wild but untrained. Evan fought like a soldier, precise, efficient, lethal. A knee to the ribs, a strike to the throat. The mercenary dropped. Another shadow filled the doorway. larger, broader, radiating menace. Hoxley himself began descending the stairs. Evan glimpsed him clearly now, a man in his mid-40s built from raw brutality, with a thick black beard and neck like a bull. His face bore the hardened lines of someone who had seen war and let it poison him. His eyes lacked mercy. He held a shotgun resting casually at his hip. "Move aside, Hale," Hoxley growled. "I only want the girl and the device." Evan raised his pistol. "Not happening. You're outnumbered." "But not outmatched." Hoxley smiled coldly. "We'll see." He fired. Evan dove for cover as pellets tore into the wall, sending concrete dust spraying. Shadow, hearing the blast, disengaged from the injured mercenary and sprinted toward Hoxley like a missile. "Shadow, no!" Evan barked, but the dog had already launched. Hoxley swung the shotgun downward just as Shadow collided with his arm. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the floor. Hoxley roared and tried to fling the dog off, but Shadow clamped down hard. Evan rose, firing 3 swift shots. Hoxley staggered back, wounded but not down. The man was massive, armor under his coat probably. The mercenaries outside shouted, their voices muffled by the storm. Reinforcements coming. Evan grabbed Shadow by the harness and pulled him back, just as Hoxley aimed the shotgun again. "This ends now," Hoxley snarled. "You're right," Evan said, firing the shot that shattered the bunker's overhead light. Darkness swallowed everything. Shadow, trained for night assaults, moved instantly. The mercenaries screamed as the dog tore through them. Evan lunged forward, using the darkness as cover, grabbing Hoxley's shotgun and wrenching it free. A punch from Hoxley slammed into Evan's ribs, nearly dropping him. Pain seared through his side, but Evan gritted his teeth and drove an elbow into Hoxley's throat. The giant stumbled. Evan kicked him down the stairs. The bunker shook with the impact as Hoxley crashed into the mercenary already lying there. Outside, the storm wailed, but no more men were rushing in. Not yet. Evan slammed the bunker door shut and dropped the locking bar in place. "We're leaving," he said, panting. "Marin, can you stand?" She forced herself upright. Pain etched deep lines around her mouth, but she nodded. "Help me." Evan supported her. Shadow limped slightly. One of the mercenaries had struck him, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. Evan packed the recorder, grabbed a flare and rope coil from the emergency kit, and led them through a narrow escape passage on the bunker's far side. Behind them, the metal door shook under gunfire. Hoxley screamed in frustration. "You can run, Hale, but I will bury you in this snow." Evan tightened his grip on Marin's waist and whispered, "Not tonight." Then he and Shadow guided her into the deeper darkness of the storm, toward whatever hope the mountains still offered. Wind carved sharp, merciless paths across the frozen mountains as the storm raged on. But Evan Hale pushed forward with unwavering resolve, carrying Marin against his chest, while Shadow limped just ahead of them, following a faint trail through the snow that only a trained war dog could find. The escape tunnel dumped them into a steep, narrow stretch of wilderness, where towering cliffs jutted out of the white haze like ancient sentinels guarding a treacherous world. Evan's every muscle felt the strain of hours without rest, but the disciplined strength of a Navy SEAL drove him past exhaustion. His breath came out steady, controlled, far calmer than most in such a deadly chase. That calm had been forged long ago, on missions where fear had no place, where survival depended on stillness inside storms far worse than this blizzard. Marin clung weakly to him, her fingers curled into his jacket. The dim lantern light from the bunker still echoed behind her eyes. Her face, pale beneath the bruises, pressed into Evan's shoulder as she fought pain and the creeping fog of unconsciousness. She was tougher than her small frame suggested, 5'6", wiry but strong, the kind of strength built from long patrol shifts, domestic disputes, and arrests gone wrong. Her blonde hair hung in tangled waves, stiff from blood and freezing wind, and her freckles stood out starkly against the pallor of her skin. Evan spoke softly through the storm. "Stay awake, Marin, just a little longer." She exhaled a shuddering breath. "Trying," she whispered. "Cold. We'll get you warm soon." His voice was steady, but a shadow crossed his thoughts. She was losing too much blood. Her body temperature was dropping too quickly. He needed to reach the weather station. Metal siding, propane heaters, emergency blankets. Anything would be better than the brutal exposure of the ridge. Shadow suddenly halted at the foot of a narrow rise. His ears pricked forward, tail stiff. Evan felt tension ripple through him. "What is it?" Shadow didn't bark. He simply lowered himself into a crouch. Combat stance. Evan slowly sank behind a boulder, keeping Marin sheltered under the curve of his arm. His eyes scanned the snow-thick horizon. At first, he saw nothing. Then, movement. A dark shape crossing the ridge above them. One person, then another. Hoxley's men. They had circled wide, tracking them from both sides. "They're trying to box us in," Evan muttered. His mind raced. Ahead of them lay a narrow ledge hugging the mountainside. One misstep meant falling into a ravine so deep and sheer it seemed carved by a giant's axe. To the right, a steep climb led up toward the ridge, dangerous but faster. To the left, the path widened but left them slow and exposed. Behind them were the mercenaries approaching through the storm. No easy escape. Shadow glanced back at Evan, eyes fierce despite the limp in his gait. "Yeah," Evan whispered. "I see it. 2. They needed height. They needed the weather station." Evan adjusted Marin's weight and chose the steep climb. "Hold tight," he murmured. "We're going up." Marin nodded weakly. "I trust you." The words hit him like a warm spark in a frozen world. Evan gripped the rocky slope, boots kicking into ice as he began the ascent, Shadow beside him. Wind lashed at them, threatening to tear them off the ridge. Halfway up, a gunshot split the storm. Evan threw himself sideways behind an outcropping. Snow exploded where the bullet struck. A sniper. One of Hoxley's newest recruits, someone with a steadier hand and better training than the others. Evan scanned the ridge. Then he saw him. A lean man in his mid-30s perched behind a cluster of snow-covered rocks, rifle tucked neatly into his shoulder. He had a sharp, angular face with a narrow jaw, sunken cheeks, and dark hair shaved close except for a streak of silver running along one side. His eyes, even through the snow, were cold with predatory focus. A hired gun. No hesitation. No conscience. Evan shifted his body to shield Marin. Another shot rang out, clipping the rock inches from Evan's head. Shadow growled deeply, tail rigid. "Not yet," Evan whispered. "Stay low." The sniper moved again, adjusting for angle. Evan could tell instantly. This man had military experience. Probably ex-special forces or foreign contractor. The way he breathed between shots, controlled and precise, marked him as far more dangerous than Quinn or any of the other corrupt cops. "They're getting serious," Evan muttered under his breath. The sniper steadied his rifle, a shot perfect for hitting Marin. Evan didn't have time to think. "Shadow!" The dog launched forward. A crack split the air. Snow erupted beside Shadow. Evan's heart seized, but Shadow kept running, dodging left, then right, bounding across the ridge with impossible agility despite his limp. The sniper shifted aim. A second gunshot pierced the storm. Shadow jerked mid-step. Evan's throat went tight. The dog stumbled, rolled across the ice, and slid toward the ravine's edge. "Shadow!" Evan lunged forward, nearly losing his grip on Marin. The dog managed to dig his claws into the snow just before tumbling into the abyss, but blood streamed from his shoulder, dark, stark against the white world. The sniper was already chambering another round. Evan's anger ignited, hot, explosive, blinding. Not fear, not panic, rage. The kind that forged itself into perfect clarity. The kind seals learn to harness, not resist. He handed Marin the side of the rock. "Don't move," he said, "no matter what." She nodded weakly, tears streaking down her frozen cheeks. "Go," she whispered. Evan broke from cover in a sudden burst of speed. He dashed across the ridge, zigzagging through the snow as the sniper fired again. The bullet grazed Evan's sleeve. Evan slid behind a rock. He could feel the vibrations. From the shot, close, too close. The sniper was adjusting again. Evan inhaled once, steadying himself. He counted the rhythm between shots. He timed the breath. Then he moved. He sprang up from behind the rock, hurling a chunk of ice as a distraction. The sniper flinched. It was enough. Evan closed the distance in seconds, barreling into him with the full force of his momentum. The sniper tumbled backward, rifle skidding across the ice. Evan pinned him down, fists hammering into his ribs and jaw. The sniper fought back, hands reaching for a knife strapped to his thigh, but Evan slammed his forearm into the man's wrist, forcing him to release it. They grappled across the ledge, boots slipping, breath steaming in the cold. The sniper threw a punch that caught Evan across the cheekbone. Evan grunted but didn't fall. He countered with a brutal elbow strike to the man's nose, sending blood across the snow. The sniper snarled, a feral, wild sound, and lunged again. But Evan had already shifted his weight. He caught the man by the collar, rotated, and slammed him into the icy ground with a force that cracked the frozen layer beneath them. The sniper gasped. Evan grabbed him by the throat. "You shot my dog," Evan growled, low, dangerous. "And you tried to kill her." The sniper spat blood. "Orders. Bad ones?" Evan lifted him by the collar, then drove him backward over the ledge. The man disappeared into the ravine's darkness, his scream swallowed by the storm. Evan didn't watch him fall. He turned immediately, sprinting back toward Marin and Shadow. Shadow lay in the snow, shivering but conscious, teeth clenched around the pain radiating from his shoulder. Evan knelt beside him. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, stroking the dog's head. "You're still with me." Shadow pressed his muzzle against Evan's hand, tail thumping once in weak reassurance. Evan tore fabric from his own jacket and pressed it against the wound, staunching the bleeding as best he could. "We need to move," he said. Marin nodded shakily. "The weather station? How far?" "Half a mile, but the hardest half-mile of our lives." He lifted her once more, and with Shadow walking stiffly beside them, they climbed the final stretch of the ridge. Snow blinded them, wind battered them. But through the white blur, Evan saw it. A tall shadow rising from the cliffside. A metal tower, the weather station, salvation. He pushed forward, but just as they neared the metal platform, distant figures emerged from the storm behind them. More mercenaries. Hoxley's backup. Evan tightened his grip on Marin and reached the station door. "Inside," he ordered. Shadow barked, standing guard despite his injury. Evan kicked the door open and rushed in. Cold metal walls surrounded them. A radio console sat at the back of the room, dusty but intact. If he could power it, just once, he could send a distress beacon. But the mercenaries were closing fast. Shadow growled deeply, placing himself between Evan and the approaching figures. "Stay with her?" Evan whispered to the dog. Then Evan stepped back outside, into the storm, into the danger, into the role he had been born for. A protector, a soldier, a man who would not let anyone he cared about die. Not tonight, not ever. The first light of morning bled faintly through the swirling snow as the storm began to weaken, though the air still cut like sharpened glass. Evan Hale stood inside the weather station's steel-walled chamber, his breath slow and controlled despite the adrenaline pulsing through him. Marin lay wrapped in emergency blankets beside the radio console, her face still pale but steadier than before. Shadow, wounded but defiant, sat pressed against her side like a silent guardian, carved from courage and pain. Outside, the wind howled against the structure, but beneath it, Evan could detect human footsteps crunching steadily closer, measured, confident, not the frantic scurry of hired guns, but the deliberate stride of a man accustomed to command. Hoxley, the corrupt lieutenant who had led the weapon smuggling operation and the man who had ordered Marin's death. Evan typed the final sequence into the radio system. The machine crackled to life, centuries-old wires humming, as if rediscovering their purpose. He attached the recorder Marin had risked her life to retrieve. The indicator light blinked red, then yellow, then green. Transmission in progress. Far away, somewhere beyond the blizzard, FBI servers were receiving the evidence that would dismantle the entire network of corruption. When the confirmation beep echoed softly through the room, Evan felt something inside him settle. An anchor dropped deep after hours of flight and battle. Marin exhaled shakily. "Did it go through?" "Every second of it," Evan said. "They'll be here soon." She smiled faintly, exhaustion softening her features. "Good." "I was running out of miracles." Evan brushed a strand of frozen hair from her cheek. "You did enough, more than enough." Shadow huffed, shifting to a more protective stance as the footsteps outside grew louder. Evan rose and grabbed his knife, the last weapon he had. His fingers traced the familiar grooves on the hilt. Memories of training halls, desert firefights, and waterborne infiltrations flickered through him. But this wasn't a mission anymore. This was personal. The door handle twisted. Evan stepped between it and his injured companions. Snow blasted inward as the heavy steel door crashed open. A tall man filled the doorway, dusted in frost. Lieutenant Trent Hoxley was in his early 40s, but looked older from the wear of ambition gone rotten. He had a thick jaw covered in coarse stubble, a nose crooked from an old bar fight, and cold blue eyes that once held the promise of leadership, but now burned with the feverish gleam of desperation. His posture was rigid, shoulders squared with the self-importance of someone who believed the world owed him submission. His coat hung open, revealing tactical armor beneath. He carried a suppressed sidearm in one gloved hand and a hunting knife strapped to his thigh. His voice cut through the room like a rusted blade. "You just couldn't mind your own business, Hale." Evan stood, still, arms relaxed but ready. "You targeted a cop and tried to murder her for doing her job." "She stuck her nose where she didn't belong," Hoxley snapped. "And you, SEAL boy, you think you can stroll into my operation and ruin years of work?" "Work?" Evan's voice was quiet, almost too calm. "Selling government weapons to foreign groups, leaving bodies in the snow? Call it what it is." Hoxley smiled, but the expression didn't touch his eyes. Survival, advancement, things you military types never understood. You obey orders like good little machines until no one needs you anymore. His gaze flicked to Marin. "And you, Officer Ellis, you should have stayed dead in that ravine." Marin inhaled sharply. Evan's jaw tightened. Hoxley leveled his gun at Evan's chest. "Last chance. Step aside, and I'll make it quick." Evan didn't move. Hoxley's smile widened. "Fine. Have it your way." He fired. Evan pivoted sharply. The bullet scraped a line across his upper arm, slicing through fabric and skin, but missing bone. He lunged forward, slamming into Hoxley and knocking the gun aside. The weapon skidded across the floor. Hoxley roared, driving his elbow into Evan's ribs. Evan countered with a brutal knee strike that forced the air from the lieutenant's lungs. Their bodies collided against the doorway as snow blasted in around them. The two men tumbled into the storm. The wind became a battlefield of its own, ripping at them, blinding them, numbing their hands as they grappled in the freezing white void. Hoxley's strength was fueled by rage and arrogance. Evan's by discipline and the will to protect. Hoxley swung wildly, catching Evan across the jaw. Evan staggered but didn't fall. Blood warmed his lip before the cold froze it. Hoxley drew his hunting knife with a snarl. Evan rolled away just as the blade slashed through the space his throat had been. Evan charged forward, tackling Hoxley into a bank of ice. The knife clattered away, disappearing beneath the powder. Hoxley grabbed a fistful of Evan's jacket, trying to overpower him, but Evan's training ran deeper. Years of controlled violence, perfected through grueling repetition, sharpened into instinct. Evan struck Hoxley across the side of the head, then again, finally disorienting him. But Hoxley was ruthless. He lunged, seized Evan by the throat, and drove him backward toward the ridge's edge. The snow crumbled under Evan's heel. A drop of several hundred feet waited behind him. Hoxley leaned in close, breath reeking of sweat and fury. "The world chews men like you up, Hale," he growled. "You serve, you bleed, and then you're forgotten. I'm the one who adapts. I'm the one who survives." Evan gasped, fingers clawing against Hoxley's grip. Stars burst behind his vision, but then a sound tore through the storm, a snarl, a blur of motion. Shadow. Despite his wound, despite the agony searing his shoulder, Shadow launched himself like a dark missile. His jaws closed around Hoxley's wrist with bone-cracking force. Hoxley screamed, releasing Evan. Evan surged upward, slamming his forearm into Hoxley's face. The lieutenant fell backward, disoriented, clutching his bleeding wrist. Shadow staggered but didn't retreat, teeth bared, growling with a fury that seemed to shake the mountain itself. Hoxley scrambled for his fallen knife beneath the snow. Evan saw the glint. Too close. Too fast. Hoxley lunged toward Shadow. Evan reacted without thinking. He intercepted the strike, caught Hoxley's forearm, twisted, and drove the man into the ground. The knife slid into the snow harmlessly. Evan pinned him. Their breaths came out in rapid bursts of steam. Hoxley thrashed, spitting curses. Evan tightened his hold, eyes cold with unshakable clarity. "It ends here," Evan said. "Your whole operation, your lies, your threats, everything." Hoxley spat blood at him. "You think anyone will believe you?" Evan grabbed Hoxley's collar and dragged him upright just as helicopter blades thundered overhead. The spotlight cut through the storm like a blade of heaven. FBI searchlights, radios crackling, armed agents descending through ropes. Hoxley's eyes went wide, the fire draining from them. Evan said nothing. He simply shoved the lieutenant into the waiting arms of the landing team. Hoxley kicked and flailed, but it was done. He was handcuffed, dragged through the snow, and finally stripped of the power he had wielded so violently. Agents stormed the area, securing equipment and tending to Marin. 2 medics knelt beside her, wrapping her in warmer blankets, checking her pupils and pulse. A 3rd medic approached Shadow. "Easy, boy," the medic murmured. "We've got you." Shadow growled softly, not in warning, but in pain. Evan knelt beside the dog, placing a steady hand on his head. Shadow relaxed, pressing his muzzle into Evan's palm. "You saved us," Evan whispered. "As always." The medic looked up. "He'll need surgery, but he's strong. He can make it." Evan nodded, throat tightening. Marin watched him, eyes soft with gratitude and something deeper. Not admiration, but connection forged in survival. "You kept your promise," she murmured. "You got us through the night." Evan brushed her hair back gently. "You kept yourself alive long enough for me to help. That counts." Once aboard the helicopter, the storm fell beneath them, shrinking into a swirling white blanket that had tried and failed to bury the truth. Hours later, the world was different. Calm, warm, bright. The hospital room was lit by soft morning sun when the doctor announced Marin would recover fully. Shadow would walk again after surgery. And Hoxley's network had collapsed within a day of the FBI receiving the transmission. The weapon trail was destroyed. Arrest warrants issued. Corrupt officers removed. Justice, slow for many years, was finally accelerating in the right direction. 10 days later, Evan stood outside the precincts building where Marin had once worked. She walked out wearing a clean uniform, her injuries healed. Her hair was brushed, her eyes brighter than he had ever seen them. "You're leaving today," she said quietly. "The Navy approved your retirement." Evan nodded. "Yeah, it was time." She stepped closer, hands in her jacket pockets. "So, what now?" He smiled faintly. "There's a private security consulting role here in town. They could use someone who knows how to handle trouble." "This town has a lot of that," she teased gently. "Think you can manage?" "If you're here," he answered, "I can manage anything." Behind them, Shadow trotted out of the clinic next door, a broad bandage wrapped around his shoulder and a shiny new medal dangling from his collar. The K9 citation of valor. He barked once and pressed himself against Evan's leg. Marin laughed softly. "A hero with another medal. You two make quite a pair." Evan scratched Shadow behind the ear. "He earned it." "So did you," Marin whispered. They walked together toward the snow-dusted hills, where dawn was breaking in gold ribbons across the sky. A beginning, a warmth breaking through months of cold, a future. And as Shadow bounded ahead, kicking up powder in joyous arcs, Evan felt, for the first time in years, that the war inside him was finally quiet, that the world, brutal as it was, still offered places where broken people could heal. Dawn had returned the truth, and with it, a life worth living. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive in thunder or lightning. They walk beside us in loyal steps, in quiet courage, in the way a wounded dog refuses to give up, or the way a broken man finds his strength again when someone else needs him. Evan, Marin, and Shadow survived not because the world was kind, but because they chose to stand for what is right, even when darkness pressed in from every side. And that is the miracle we carry into our own lives, that even in the coldest storms, there is always a light waiting to rise, always a dawn ready to return the truth. Maybe your miracle won't look like a rescue in the snow or a helicopter breaking through the clouds. Maybe it will be a small act of kindness, a moment of bravery you didn't know you had, or the gentle reminder that you are never walking alone, because God watches even in the silent hours, guiding, protecting, and lifting those who refuse to lose hope. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment about the miracle you're praying for, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story of courage, redemption, and God's quiet protection. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones, keep you safe, and send light into every storm you face. Amen.